The morning of February the 13th, 1980, Dani Janssen woke up at approximately 7:30 in the morning in the house on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills, California, and reached across the bed and found that the space beside her was empty and cold in the specific way that a space is cold when the person who should be in it has not been in it for a significant period of time. She got up. She called his name. The house was quiet in the way that a house is quiet when the quiet is not the ordinary quiet of early morning, but the specific quiet of a house that contains something that has not yet been found. She found him in the den. He was on the floor. He was wearing pajamas. The television was on. The glass was on the table beside the chair he had apparently been sitting in before he was on the floor. He was 50 years old. She called the paramedics. The paramedics arrived. They confirmed what she had already known from the moment she saw him on the floor of the den with the television on and the glass on the table, which was that the confirmation was the last thing that needed to happen. Before the morning became the morning it was going to be for the rest of her life, which was the morning of February the 13th, 1980, the morning she found David Janssen on the floor of the den. He had had a heart attack. This was the determination of the paramedics and subsequently of the Los Angeles County coroner. Myocardial infarction. The heart had done what hearts do when they have been asked to do what his heart had been asked to do across 50 years of a life that had asked a great deal of it. He was 50 years old. He had been, for the preceding 12 years, one of the most recognizable faces on American television. The Fugitive had run from 1963 to 1967 and had made him across 4 seasons of a show about a man running from the law while searching for the real killer of his wife, one of the most watched performers in the history of the medium to that point. The series finale of The Fugitive, in which Richard Kimble finally confronts the one-armed man who killed his wife, had been, at the time of its airing in August of 1967, the most watched single episode of a television series in history, with an estimated 78 million viewers. 78 million people had watched David Janssen run for 4 years and had watched the running end. And on the morning of February the 13th, 1980, Dani Janssen had found him on the floor of the den. And the finding was the end of a different kind of running. The running that the 50 years of his life had been organized around. The running that had nothing to do with Richard Kimble and everything to do with David Harold Meyer, which was the name he had been born with and which was the name that the 50 years of the life that had preceded the morning had been running away from and toward and around in the specific, exhausting way of a person who has never quite arrived at the destination and who never stops moving toward it. Tonight, my friend, I want to take you back through the night that preceded the morning. Not only the night, the whole life, but the night first, because the night is where the story of David Janssen most honestly lives, and because the reconstruction of the night gives us something that the chronological biography does not give us, which is the specific texture of what a man who has been running his whole life is doing in the hours before the running stops. Let us go back, hour by hour, to the night of February the 12th, 1980, 11 o'clock in the evening. The house on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. David Janssen and Dani had had dinner with friends that evening. The friends have been described in the subsequent accounts of that night in various ways. Close friends, professional associates, the kind of social relationships that the specific geography of Beverly Hills in 1980 generated among people of the specific professional status that David Janssen occupied in the entertainment community. The dinner had been pleasant. The accounts of the people who had been at the dinner, given in the immediate aftermath and in the subsequent years, describe a man who was his characteristic self at the dinner. Warm, present, funny in the specific way. He was funny, which was the way of a man who understood timing and understatement and the specific quality of self-deprecating humor that people of genuine intelligence deploy when they want to be liked without appearing to want to be liked. He had been drinking at the dinner. This is the fact that the accounts of the evening are not entirely consistent about, which is itself a form of information. Some accounts describe a man who had a glass of wine at dinner, the ordinary accompaniment to a social meal in Beverly Hills in 1980. Other accounts describe something more than that, something that the people who were present and who knew Dani Janssen well enough to read the difference between the social drinking and the other drinking recognized as the other drinking, though they did not describe it in those terms in the immediate aftermath of the night, because the immediate aftermath was not the time for precision about what the drinking had been. He had a heart condition. This is the second fact that the accounts of the evening are not entirely consistent about, which is again a form of information. He had been told. The specific nature of what he had been told, and by whom and when and what he had done with the telling, is the part of the night's backstory that the available accounts are most oblique about, in the specific way that accounts are oblique about things that the people doing the accounting have reasons to be oblique about. What is established? His heart had been giving him trouble. Not in the dramatic sense of a man who had had a previous heart attack or who had been hospitalized for cardiac symptoms. In the quieter sense of a man who had been told by someone, a doctor perhaps, or someone who was not quite a doctor, but who had some medical knowledge and who was in a position to observe what Dani Janssen's body was doing and to communicate an assessment of it, that the heart was not in the condition that the heart of a 50-year-old man who intends to continue living needs to be in. He had not made the specific changes that this kind of communication, received from the specific source from which he received it, would have prompted a different kind of man to make. He had not stopped drinking. He had not reduced the professional pace that the professional life of Dani Janssen in 1980 required, which was a pace that was demanding in the way of careers that are sustained at the level his career was sustained by a man of his specific qualities, which included the inability to do less than the work required and the inability to treat the work as less than the total commitment the work deserved. Midnight. The guests had gone. The house was quiet. Dani went to bed. David stayed up. This is the part of the night that the morning's discovery allows us to reconstruct backward, because the morning's discovery tells us certain things about the night that the night itself does not directly document. The television was on when she found him. This means the television had been on for the hours between midnight and whatever time in the early morning the heart attack had occurred. The glass was on the table beside the chair. This means he had been sitting in the chair with a drink, which is either the drink that the television watching had required or the continuation of the evening's drinking. And the distinction between those two things is the distinction that the accounts of people who knew Dani Janssen understand, even if they do not always state it. He was alone. Dani was asleep. The house was quiet. The television was on. He was sitting in the chair in the den, and he was in the specific privacy of the middle of the night in a house where the rest of the household is asleep. Whoever he was when nobody was watching, which is the most important version of a person and the version that the public persona and the professional life are least equipped to reveal. Who was Dani Janssen when nobody was watching? This is the question that the night of February the 12th, 1980, and the morning of February the 13th are the frame for, and it is the question I want to spend the rest of this story answering, which requires going back further than the night, back to the beginning, back to the specific origins that produced the man who was sitting alone in the den of his house on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills at 1 a.m. on the night before he died. David Harold Meyer was born on March the 27th, 1931 in Napanee, Nebraska. He was not born as Dani Janssen. He was born as David Harold Meyer, the son of Harold Meyer and Bernice Graff in a small town in southern Nebraska that is not on any map that most Americans have ever looked at, and that has no particular distinction beyond the fact of having been the specific geography of the beginning of the life of the man who would become Dani Janssen. His father was Harold Meyer. His father was not present, in the way that Harold Meyer was not present, which was the specific way of a man who was in the life of his son only in the sense of having contributed to the biological fact of his son's existence, and who was not present in any other sense that the subsequent life of the son required a father to be present in. The absence of Harold Meyer from the life of David Harold Meyer is the first and in some ways the most structurally important fact about David Janssen, because the absence organized the structure of everything that followed in the specific way that paternal absences organize the structures of the lives they are absent from. His mother was Bernice Graf Meyer. She was a woman of the specific combination of beauty and determination that the subsequent accounts of her describe with the consistency of people who are describing someone they observed closely and who was, in their observation, remarkable in ways that were visible. She was also, and this is the fact that is most directly relevant to the story of who David Janssen was, an aspiring actress. Not a successful actress in the professional sense. The career she aspired to was not the career she achieved, but a woman who had the aspiration and who had, alongside the aspiration, the specific quality of physical attractiveness and social ease that the aspiration was grounded in, and who transmitted both the aspiration and the grounding to the son who grew up watching her navigate the specific terrain of a woman in the 1930s who wants something that the terrain is not organized around providing. She moved to California. The specific mechanism and timing of the move from Napanee, Nebraska to California is described differently in different accounts, which is a pattern in the biographical record of David Janssen that reflects the specific quality of his relationship to the documented facts of his own origins. A relationship that was, across the years of his public life, managed in the way that a person manages the relationship between where they came from and the version of where they came from that the public version of themselves can accommodate. What is established, Bernice Janssen, as she had become through a subsequent marriage to Eugene Janssen, was in Hollywood with her son by the time the son was old enough to be in Hollywood. The son was David Janssen by then, having taken the stepfather's name in the specific act of nominal re-identification that was also an act of the specific kind of identity management that the subsequent career would require at a professional level. He was performing from childhood. Child acting, in the specific form that the Hollywood of the 1940s offered to the children of women who understood that their children had something the industry might find useful, and who were positioned to offer what their children had to the industry. He appeared in films as a child. The films were not significant. He was a child actor in the way that many children who grow up in the specific geography of the Hollywood of the 1940s become child actors, not through a single dramatic discovery, but through the accumulation of small opportunities that the proximity to the industry and the specific qualities of the child made available. He grew up. He served in the Army. He came back. He resumed the career that the Army had interrupted, which was the career of a young actor working his way through the specific hierarchy of the television industry of the early 1950s, which was the medium that was expanding fast enough to absorb the supply of young men with his combination of looks and presence and the specific quality of screen charisma that the camera found in him. The specific quality of screen charisma that the camera found in David Janssen is the thing about him that requires careful description, because it is the thing that made The Fugitive what it was and that the subsequent career was organized around, and because it is also the thing that is most directly connected to the specific quality of the interior life that the screen charisma was expressing rather than concealing. He was not conventionally handsome in the way of the leading men of his generation, whose handsomeness was their primary commercial attribute. He was attractive in a way that was more specific than conventional handsomeness. The face had a quality of lived-in experience, of apparent familiarity with difficulty, of the specific kind of worn intelligence that the faces of people who have been through things they do not advertise tend to have. The camera found in his face something that the faces of men who have not been through things they do not advertise do not have, which was the quality of a person who is carrying something, and the carrying of it is visible in the face without the specific content of what is being carried being visible. This quality, the quality of apparent burden without apparent content, was precisely the quality that Richard Kimble required. Richard Kimble is a man who is running. He is running from something specific, the false accusation, the legal system, the one-armed man. But the running is also the expression of something more general, something that the audience of the show received without necessarily articulating, which was the running of a man for whom the running itself is the condition rather than the means to an end. He runs not only because of the accusation, but because running is the thing he knows how to do, the thing that the interior life, that the face communicates the existence of, has produced as the primary activity of the self. David Janssen knew how to play that because David Janssen knew how to do that. The running that Richard Kimble was doing on screen for 4 years was the running that David Janssen had been doing for his entire adult life. And the camera captured it because the camera captures the things that are genuinely there rather than the things that are performed. And what was genuinely there in David Janssen's face for 4 seasons of The Fugitive was the face of a man who understood running from the inside. What was he running from? This is the question that the night of February the 12th, sitting alone in the den with the television on and the glass on the table, is the most honest answer to. Not running from anything specific, in the way that Richard Kimble was running from something specific. Running in the general way of a person whose interior life has organized itself, for reasons that are multiple, and that the available accounts of his life allow only partial access to, around the act of movement rather than the act of arrival. He drank. He had been drinking since before The Fugitive, and he drank through The Fugitive, and he drank after The Fugitive. In the way of a person for whom the drinking is the management of the specific quality of interior experience that the running is also the management of, the two activities parallel and mutually supporting, the running providing the external movement that the interior requires, and the drinking providing the management of the interior when the running is not available. He was, by the accounts of the people who knew him across the years of his career, one of the most charming and most genuine people they had encountered in the specific world of the entertainment industry, which is a world that produces charm in quantity, and that is therefore a world in which the distinction between genuine charm and performed charm is a distinction that the people in it are better positioned than most to make. The people who knew David Janssen made the distinction in his favor consistently and specifically. They described his warmth as real, his humor as unforced, his generosity with the people around him as the expression of a genuine care, rather than the professional performance of care. They also described, in the careful way of people describing something that they observed and that they are being careful about, the other thing, the thing that was present alongside the warmth and the humor and the genuine care, the thing that was not depression in the clinical sense that Robert Young's story required the clinical sense for, but was closer to what the people who observed it in David Janssen described as a restlessness, the specific quality of a person who cannot quite be still, who cannot quite arrive, who is always in the process of moving toward the next thing rather than inhabiting the current thing, in the way of someone for whom the current thing is always slightly insufficient and the next thing is always where the arrival is going to happen. He was married twice. The first marriage, to Ellie Graham in 1958, lasted until 1967, the period of The Fugitive. The specific nature of the marriage and the specific reasons for its end are the details that the available accounts are most careful about, which is the pattern of careful accounts about difficult things and which indicates, without stating, that the end of the marriage contained what it contained. The second marriage to Dani Greco in 1975 was the marriage that lasted until the morning of February the 13th, 1980, and was the marriage that Dani found the end of on the floor of the den. The career after The Fugitive was the career of a man who had achieved the specific kind of television fame that The Fugitive had generated, and who was now in the process of determining what the career does when the specific achievement is in the past, and the subsequent work is the work of the career's extended life, rather than its defining moment. He made films. He appeared in television movies and miniseries. He was professional and he was good, and he was, in the work of the years between The Fugitive and February of 1980, giving the productions what they needed from him with the consistency of a man who had been giving productions what they needed from him since he was a child in the Hollywood of the 1940s, the heart. Let me come back to the heart, because the heart is the medical fact, and the medical fact is the fact that the morning of February the 13th made the central fact, and the heart deserves the honest treatment that the available accounts allow. He had been told about the heart. The specific person who told him and the specific nature of what they told him is the area of the available accounts that is most inconsistently described, which is the pattern I noted earlier, and which is the pattern of accounts that are describing something that the people doing the describing have reasons to be inconsistent about. What is consistent across the accounts is the conclusion. He knew. He had been told something about the condition of his heart, that a man who is told something about the condition of his heart and who has the specific kind of relationship to his own mortality that Dani Janssen had would have been expected to act on in the specific way of taking the information seriously and making the changes the information warranted. He did not make all the changes the information warranted. He continued to drink. He continued to work at the pace the work required. He continued to be the man he had always been, which was the man who was moving rather than the man who had arrived, the man for whom the current thing was always slightly insufficient, and the next thing was always where the arrival was going to happen. And on the night of February the 12th, 1980, the next thing was the television in the den and the glass on the table and the quiet house and the specific privacy of a man alone in the middle of the night with whatever he was alone with. What was he alone with? I want to be honest about the limits of what I can tell you here, because the honesty matters and the limits are real. The specific content of what Dani Janssen was alone with in the den of his house on Rodeo Drive in the early hours of February the 13th, 1980, is not available in the way that would allow me to describe it to you with the specificity that description requires. He is not here to tell us. The people who were closest to him have described the general shape of his interior life, the restlessness, the warmth, the drinking, the specific quality of a man who was always slightly in motion. But the specific content of the specific night is not recoverable in the way that a documented fact is recoverable. What I can tell you is what the night's evidence suggests. The television was on. The television was on because he was watching it, or because having it on was the specific condition that the middle of the night required for a man who was not sleeping, who was not doing anything that required specific attention, who needed the presence of something in the room that was providing the kind of low-level company that the television provides in the middle of the night in a house where the rest of the household is asleep. The glass was on the table. The glass was there because he had been drinking, which was the activity that the middle of the night, in the specific circumstances he was in, required of a man who drank in the way he drank. The television, the glass, the quiet house, the specific privacy of a man who is 50 years old and who has been running since before he understood that he was running, and who is sitting in a chair in the middle of the night in Beverly Hills, and who is, for the first time in a very long time, perhaps, or perhaps as always, perhaps as the permanent condition of the interior life, that the running and the warmth and the television fame and the 2 marriages and the 40 years of being Dani Janssen had been organized around simply there, Not running, not performing, not giving the production what it needed. Not being the most charming man in the room, simply sitting in a chair with the television on and a glass on the table at 1 in the morning in the specific privacy of a man who has nothing to perform and nowhere to run to. The heart attack happened somewhere in those hours. The specific time it happened is not precisely established, because the specific time requires a witness and there was no witness. It happened in the early hours of the morning, after Dani was asleep and before she woke up. It happened in the den, with the television on. It happened to a man who was 50 years old and who had a heart that had been told it was in the condition it was in, and who had continued to ask of the heart what the life required. The heart stopped. He was on the floor when she found him. The television was on. The glass was on the table. The house was quiet. He was 50 years old. Now, my friend, I want to sit with you in the meaning of the morning and the night that preceded it, because the meaning is not simple and does not resolve into the clean lesson that stories about the deaths of famous people tend to resolve into, and because the dishonesty of the clean lesson is a disservice to the specific, complicated truth of who David Janssen was. He was a man who ran. The running was the thing his life was organized around, not in the external sense of the restlessness and the relentless professional pace, but in the deeper sense of the person who has never quite arrived, who has never quite found the version of the current moment that is sufficient, who is always in the process of moving toward the thing that is going to be enough and who never quite gets there. Because getting there is not the structure that the interior life is organized around. The running was also, paradoxically, the thing that made him extraordinary at the specific role that made him most famous. Because Richard Kimble was organized around the same structure. The man who is running not only from the accusation, but because running is the thing, because the arrival at the destination is not where the story lives, and the running is where the story lives. He played Richard Kimble with the total authenticity of a man who understood the running from the inside. And the understanding was total because it was not understanding in the analytical sense, but understanding in the lived sense. The understanding of someone who has been doing the thing that the character is doing. He also gave the people around him, the people in his professional life and in his personal life, and in the audience of 78 million people who watched the finale of The Fugitive, a quality of warmth and presence and genuine care that the running did not preclude. And that was, in the specific way of the qualities that survive alongside the things that might seem to preclude them, genuinely his. The warmth was real. The running was real. They coexisted in the same person in the way that the things that seem like they should cancel each other out coexist in people who are real rather than simple. He sat in the den of his house on Rodeo Drive, with the television on and the glass on the table, alone in the middle of the night, on the night of February the 12th, 1980. And the heart that had been told it was in the condition it was in, and that had continued to be asked what the life required, stopped. And Dani found him in the morning, and the morning was what the morning was. Sleep well, my friend. And the next time you see Richard Kimble running, in the opening credits of The Fugitive, in any of the episodes, in the specific quality of a man who is in perpetual motion towards something he cannot quite reach, see what is in the face. You are seeing David Janssen. You are seeing the running. The running was real. It ran for 50 years, and it stopped on the floor of a den in Beverly Hills in the early hours of February the 13th, 1980, with the television on and a glass on the table and nobody in the room.